I'm excited to introduce Andrew Rubin, who is the president and co-founder of Symptom Media. He also co-directed and produced the featured documentary Ride with Larry of the aspirational journey of Parkinson's advocate Larry Smith. And nice to see you again, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, nice to see you again, Cam.
Yeah, we're glad to have you because this is going to be an interesting topic, the mental health and education. I work in it as well. It's always nice to dive into those types of videos and also films. So what types of projects do you work on?
Well, in the company, over the last 10 years, it's now grown. We're well over 1,000 films showcasing all different sort of behavioral and mental health issues. We continue to grow that library, and now it's expanded and evolved. And we actually also do continuing education for professionals too. We're now also in over 500 universities that use us, like Yale, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, NYU, my alma mater. So the projects that I work in now, we've kind of expanded, exploring with different experts like teletherapy or ethics. And we just wrapped a large series that we're still finishing on forensic nursing, which was fascinating, with a forensic nurse organization. That was over a year process, creating all these characters and case studies and stories about sexual assault and domestic violence and what it is like when that person walks in after an extremely traumatic incident, and what do you do as a clinician? So dramatically speaking, it's you can't get anything more loaded in terms of drama or for a performance with an actor than that subject matter, as difficult as it is. So that was a really gratifying and intense series that we've just been putting together.
And how did you go about putting the series together? Are these interviews with the actual person or this reenactments hired by an actor?
Yes, so everything we do is with actors, professional actors in Hollywood and LA. So we go through a rigorous process from beginning to end. We create these stories and characters with experts. So everything that we did was working with a team of real forensic nurses. And some of it will be based on an amalgamation of like real life cases that they've dealt with, or just will kind of come up with a fictional character that can help represent different areas, like issues that are in the transgender community or in the military with sexual assault. So we come up with all these characters and these stories, and all through the process, basically scripting out, we have to create an entire world because we don't want the actor to do that. And we want it to be realistic. And we don't want an actor to bring in any of their own trauma or experiences into a performance. So the burden is even extra wide. So if you're writing a screenplay, you might just be coming up with a backstory and then narrowly focusing on your storyline. But in our case, with these actors and the process, we have to think of everything, and we do. So these are quite big volumes that then go to the actor as to who their character is, everything about them. And then we bring in an actor and they have rehearsals with the actual expert. So they actually work with the forensic nurse in this instance, understand what the psychology is of this character and what they're going through. And then we do a whole series of filming over a course of a day with that actor, where we do our primary film. In this instance, it was a woman who, her and her husband are addicted to meth, is one example. And there was an argument. Her husband was paranoid, assaulted her, stabbed her. She was taken after she called 911 to the hospital. And then that's where our scene begins, when she's in front of a forensic nurse. And so that's like the core of our scene that we start filming with, is how does that forensic nurse handle this very traumatized patient and get the information she's going to need to do her job and to help put that assailant away in jail.
And then what's the course of that? Like, so she's in the hospital. Is it like over a couple of days? What is the video, like the end result of the video?
Sure. Yeah. So, again, these are like very specific. So a lot of our library, the vast majority of it is to showcase what a bipolar manic episode looks like with a presentation that's hypersexuality. Some of those will be very focused on just presenting what a diagnosis looks like. So by the time you finish watching it, you're like, oh, wow, that's what mania will look like. And that's what mania with hypersexuality will look like. Okay, that's what I might be dealing with in the ER or in my office. So for this one very specifically, it was the end result of the video is to show when that person steps into your office, and everything is filmed dramatically. We just use a black void. So it's just, we don't set it in any particular setting. We just kind of focus purely on the actor's performance, because that's what really the person needs to focus on is watching it. For this instance, the video that I was describing with the woman who was assaulted, who her and her husband are addicted to meth, like the end result of that video is to show how the clinician would then get an entire case history out of this person. So walking through, and also from a trauma-informed perspective. So how do you do that carefully? How do you respectfully engage this person? How do you make sure everything that you're doing is with their consent? So you're not stepping over those lines. And by the end of it, like, you're watching a video it's about 20, 25 minutes. We never really do long form. And so if you're someone watching our film, you're like, oh, wow, okay, this clinician was able to go through everything that happened to her in her assault, kind of get all the core pieces. We've kind of identified, like, oh, she's protecting her husband and she's also concerned about her child that she left behind, and how you deal with all these different aspects while your job is to get all the pieces of what happened in that incident, and also what needs to be done medically and emotionally for this person, psychologically.
Wow, that is fascinating.
So it's just that one interaction, that one, you could say, yeah, there's an entire story that's going to happen with her journey, but this is that most critical moment when she first walks in the door and is dropped off by the ambulance and the police.
So how do you, wow, there's so many questions I have for how do you create it? How do you write it? How do you shoot it? Do you have two cameras shooting this? Do you do one? Do you have to do resetups? It's kind of like a film, like.
Yeah, well, we have a 3-camera setup, and we film it like it's a live Broadway stage play. So we do it one take. Well, there's more takes than one. For authenticity and to make it and we love improvisation, and that's why we also make sure the actor is as informed about the situation and the character as possible, so that when they veer off and they go in different directions, they're never leaving what is real. They have a wealth to pull from that we've given them. To make everything feel as real as possible, we really just say, this is all one take, go. You're on the stage in front of a live audience, and we have all the cameras there to capture it. Typically, this one, though, is interesting because so much is into the clinician with the forensic nurses. Like, you need to see how this clinician is behaving. The actor, critically, I should have mentioned, is always performing opposite a real expert. So whatever they do dramatically or in their performance, they always have a real psychologist, forensic nurse, psychiatric nurse, psychiatrist sitting across from them, responding as if it was they're just doing their job with a real patient. In this instance with the forensic nurse, it was a real forensic nurse, and we had to film her on camera. The vast majority of what we do is the actor is the only one on camera and the clinician is off camera, because again, it's about what are you being presented with. You should be watching it from the point of view of as if you were the person interviewing this patient.
Does the nurse ever have any input if she's worked in this for a long time? Like, they wouldn't do that?
Beginning to
does that
end,
ever happen?
We tell them they're the directors. They're in the driver's seat. Everything is about their expertise, and we bring them in because they're experts. So everything from the very beginning, from the scripting process, and then when we're on set, it's like my little speech to them is like, you have veto power over anything that happens. You can say, stop, this is not right, and intercede. And of course they do. And everything is like, if something veers off what is real, we'll just take it again and fix it. So we give the director hat to the expert. And then my role as a filmmaker and my background in filming and in screenwriting is that I can develop all the infrastructure that allows that to happen. And so that their role is purely focused on getting the performance as accurate as possible.
Couple things. One is, what cameras do you use to shoot this?
We use 5Ds, Canon 5Ds, and then I'll take I want to say it's the Zoom microphone, the Zoom kit.
Do you boom them or do you mic them, or both?
It depends. So like if the clinician is off camera, we mic them and boom them. But when they're all on camera, everything is on booms with shotgun mics.
How many people are on your crew?
We keep it as minimal as possible. A lot of the times it's just me, again, because we want it to be as intimate as possible, just the actor. So, I mean, luckily, like when we're going into production, we set up our studio and everything gets set up. There's really except with the exception of when we were doing this forensic nursing series where there was a lot more complications in terms of it was just different in terms of what we normally do because of what the forensic nurses are doing and what we were going to show. But typically we set it up like it's a set stage. So the lights, the cameras, everything is sort of locked. And then that way we really don't need anybody but me there and the expert and the actor. Because I think yes, more people would always be great to have just more help. Allows at least the intimacy to be there for the actor where it can really just feel like they're in a real session with just a clinician. And it doesn't have to feel like a lot is going on outside of just what they're there to do with their performance.
And then with the screenwriting, that's great that you have a background in screenwriting. How do you come up with the script? Are you working with the nurse to go, okay, like how would this play out? What's your research to go in? And then who is checking and, helping you revise the script?
Yeah, so it depends on...
how does that work?
Well, throughout the whole process. Nothing is done without working with them in lockstep. How we will usually go is when we're coming up with an idea, it usually will depend on what the goal of the series is. So we've done one which is for military issues with PTSD and veterans. We did that with Dr. Fiddler. He's an expert in that. One of his clients, he's retired now, were active or former military, were veterans, dealt with a lot of PTSD issues. So we'll identify the subjects if it's the topics that are forward, or in some instances, it's really portraying a certain character that is more necessary than maybe the subject matter. Certain cultural issues, we really want to portray something that happens in a certain population more than another one. So it just depends on whether okay, we're focused on PTSD here. What are the different patient populations that are more likely to be experiencing PTSD so that we can cover as a diverse range of populations as possible. So that's kind of the initial phase where we're identifying what the subjects are. And then we just go out from there building the characters. Again, with the forensic nursing series, just because we've been talking about it, we want to make sure that we're portraying the diverse populations. So assaults can happen to anybody. So we want to make sure we represent the LGBTQ plus community. We have someone in the military. There is someone who's dealing with addiction. So that's kind of how we'll identify those areas to create the characters. So then we come up with the backgrounds. We work on outlines in the script. And then every stage of that process is done side by side with an expert. And then typically another expert can come in and look at it, approve it, especially if there's a different expert who's going to be on camera playing the expert on camera or off camera. And then even afterwards in the approval process, it will go to maybe not necessarily someone in that field, but a psychologist or someone to review the film afterwards before it's released. So nothing even goes out publicly until there's yet another round of a review. So the expert is there from the beginning to the end. So everything I do, and I obviously can bring in my screenwriting background with these experts and being well, what's the dramatic turn? The actor is going to need to know what's happening to them before they walk in the room. It's not just we start, did they get into a fender bender? How is their presentation across from are they adversarial? Are they not wanting to be here? So I can help really guide as well as we do the whole process.
I think, wow, that is such exciting work and all the different topics that you can hit in mental health.
Yeah, it's endless. It's kind of the overwhelming part of it, that there's no shortage of it.
There's never a dull moment. I think that you have a plethora of topics that it must be, you just get to learn so much, so it would never get boring doing the same repetitive thing over and over again.
No, it's always even doing, and we've been releasing now series on teletherapy and exploring issues that have emerged that no one's ever really had to deal with before, which is also fascinating. And so, so it's constantly changing and there's endless subjects to do. We were doing series on how do you deal with discovering that there's abuse in the home over teletherapy? And so how do you do mandated reporting when you're not face to face with someone who's in danger? Or, what do you do when your client shows up, which actually apparently happens a lot, and they're inebriated over telehealth? And so there's just all these, so like we get just, there's endlessly interesting situations to explore. And on the screenwriting side of me, that you're like, oh, wow, these are just like great dramatic moments that you would never maybe think about or explore and maybe a regular project that you're doing.
Right. There's multiple layers to a person with trauma. There's a lot of conflict, and there's a lot to write on. As we know, as screenwriters, you have to have conflict. and the different layers that you're not just going to show it, you got to do it in mannerisms, in the way they say something. There's so many ways to do it without, actually saying it.
Yeah, it's actually funny you said that, because actually a lot of the people using our videos, another way they use it in classrooms, professors or others, is they'll actually show our films without the sound on to teach nonverbals and behavioral cues. Like, because the actor, when they're doing it at the best in their performance, like they're actually inhabiting that person, so they will pick up the mannerisms where they are maybe like have the physical tics, or the eye movement, or the body language. We do a lot training with our actors, especially when someone's portraying an adolescent too. We have to sometimes work with an actor saying, you are a well-adjusted adult who has great vocabulary, and you have really good personal skills, and you're respectful. And now we have to like strip all of that away, because you're not only a teenager, but you're a teenager dealing with depression and anxiety, and that looks different and sounds different and behaves differently. So it's not just the words that you're going to be saying, but it's so much of the body language too.
Well, especially with teenagers, because a lot of them don't talk.
Yes, that's actually...
It's like pulling teeth to just get them to say anything.
Yeah, we worked with this wonderful psychiatric nurse from UCLA, professor, and she works primarily with adolescents, and it was hilarious because she was saying, well, like most of the time I'm just talking the entire time because they won't say anything. And her training with the actors were so well done that a lot of times she was the one talking off camera the entire time as they were silent. And she was so good at her job that we would have these funny moments where, the subject matter wouldn't be funny because we would be doing suicide assessments, because that's extraordinarily important with an adolescent. And we would be training the actor because we would do different versions of suicide assessments to show different outcomes. And, the actor's objective is to refuse to go with her because they're in danger to themselves. So they need to be institutionalized. And so we would work with the actor because the outcome of that video is you're not going to go and you're going to put up a fight. But she was so good at her job that every take, for so many takes, would be the actor would go, okay, like, I understand, I'm going to go with you. We're like, no, like, because she just, anyways, that was a little bit of a tangent there, but it reminded me of that session when we were working with her. But most
that's
adolescents is you're not talking, you're silently staring at the ground.
Exactly. I admire people that can work with teenagers. Because I think that would be the hardest to do.
I had a very short stint over 10 years ago teaching middle school and high school. Like, never again.
It's a different breed. Yeah. And, so then you also did a feature documentary, Ride with Larry, which is on Amazon, so anybody can watch it. And so well done. I loved how you interwove the ride through South Dakota with interviews with doctors, talk on marijuana, friends, the whole process of putting together something. And I found myself very engaged in it because, documentaries can be sometimes a hit or a miss there is the story, but you have to create the story that people are going to want to stick with and watch. I thought you did a great job, and Larry was amazing. So how did you get involved in directing and producing this project?
Well, it's definitely a labor of love and a passion project. It was my friend and co-director, Ricardo Villarreal. He had done a documentary before this, and it was through a conversation with him and talking about like potential subjects. And he was telling me about Larry. The subject was actually his wife's uncle. and that he wanted to do this big thing. He had Parkinson's. And at the time, actually, Larry wanted to ride across the country. Physically, that was too challenging for him, it would turn out. But that was the initial idea. And Ricardo didn't know that my dad had been diagnosed with Parkinson's. So had my dad's father, so my grandfather, and I had a cousin with Parkinson's. So it was very big in my family. Obviously, with Ricardo, Larry was part of his family. So I, of course, said yes. And actually, it started with us taking a road trip out to South Dakota to be like, are they good on camera? Like, is there a story here? It was very personally affecting when I first met Larry, because it was kind of looking into the future with what would happen with my dad. So a lot of people that have Parkinson's in their families, it's not easy to watch. But then, of course, Larry's story and who he is, and Betty, and they're so inspiring. And what they presented to us as we filmed intensely for a week was just, there's absolutely a story here. So we edited a trailer, and we started fundraising to make the film. And of course, by then it had morphed into Larry wanted to do one last big thing before it was too late, which was ride across South Dakota instead of the country to raise awareness.
Yeah, he's amazing. All the things that he did. And then also to learn, which I did not know, is that Parkinson's is not just from genetics. I didn't realize that. That could be environmentally, you could get it, like he did.
Yeah, he got it. They think a combination, and a lot of actually first responders, police officers especially, get Parkinson's because they have to sit in their cars. And as back in the day, of course, a lot less environmental protections, but you have to sit with your car idling all day in those fumes. And also a response to a very dangerous chemical fire in Connecticut. They think might have been a big factor because a lot of people got sick from that. They just didn't have the protective gear back then. But yeah, there's a lot of environmental factors. A lot of people who work in dry cleaning stores, chemicals there are known to cause Parkinson's. There's a huge issue with Vietnam vets because of Agent Orange. So that was actually one of our producers, Josh Haygood. His father has Parkinson's because he was a Vietnam vet, and it was from Agent Orange. So yeah, it's not just genetics, though. Genetics is very potent for those who have that gene.
Yeah, so that's kind of scary. I mean, I was just like, oh my gosh, like you could get the 23andMe and find out, well, you don't have a precursor for it, but then you get it, and then you're wondering why. So that was really informative. And then also the marijuana was not and is not legal in South Dakota. How did you think to bring that in?
So the medical marijuana part, I mean, it took a long time to get Betty and Larry to agree to do that on camera because of the legal issues. Betty at the time worked for the University of South Dakota, so she was a professor, and Larry was very well respected in his community. And a retired police captain, so they had a lot of hesitation. And of course, things have changed since we filmed, and we like to feel like our film had something to do with that.
I bet it did.
But it was actually, my father he was the one in the film that was giving Larry the medical marijuana. That was him, and he was a very big advocate for it before it became. Unfortunately, it kind of turned into a little bit of a fad that buried the real medical benefits, where it's like, oh, put CBD in your coffee. But for people like my dad and those who take it seriously, the person who developed what Larry used worked with my dad over years to really create a formula that would be very specific for people with neurological conditions. And my dad was kind of the guinea pig, with Jim was his name. And actually, because of the documentary and it going viral with the medical marijuana, they have turned that into a real product. And they're actually doing real studies with it. It's called the Brave line. That was one of the things that came out of it. So yeah, it took a lot of convincing, because also when we were filming it, it was still very much taboo. Like the store that we filmed, obviously we couldn't say it because it happened after the film came out, but that dispensary we show Larry going to in downtown San Diego was actually raided. And it wasn't one of the ones that was like a speakeasy where you don't know it exists. It was right there on the street. And they made and San Diego made a show of it where they had, I think it was ATF, like they literally broke in all the windows, and as if like, Pablo Escobar was hiding in the back. It was very, very dramatic and overdone. And really it was people like my dad that went there as real patients. So anyways, things have changed, thankfully for the better, for access.
Yeah, it was amazing that it felt like minutes after he took the dose, his symptoms were lowered, but it doesn't really help over the long. It just kind of eases the symptoms, but it doesn't really take away the symptoms.
Well, yeah, I mean, it has different effects. I mean, obviously it's not a cure, which, my dad would be the first to say, although it does have a lot of benefits. And of course, just no one's studying it thanks to our laws, and the Schedule 1 classification. I think it's Schedule 1 that puts it on with the most dangerous of drugs, ridiculously enough. It does multiple things. And of course, everyone's different, which was something we've had to say, which we have said. We got, I can't even begin to tell you how many thousands and thousands of people reached out to us when it kind of ricocheted around the world. I think by our latest count, it's been over 500 million views because it just keeps getting reposted, and the BBC featured it in a SEER segment in the UK. And anyways, so how it affects, so for my dad, I can speak to that personally, and like what it does for Larry is it really helped ease the medication, because it really does a number on your body. So my dad would kind of time when he would take the Cinemet and do medical marijuana to help ease that transition. But also it alleviates the neurological pain. So all that Parkinson's usually is a matter of being stiff. It's the jerky movements, like we explain in the documentary, is a side effect of the medication. So it actually does twofold. It eases those side effects of the medication by calming the body. And then when you don't have the medication and your body stiffens up and it's all this pain in your joints and your muscles, it helps ease that stiffness too. And then for my dad as well, it helped him sleep, because a lot of people with Parkinson's can't sleep, like they're moving all night or they're in pain lying in bed. So there's like a lot of different ways. It's really a matter of quality of life is what the use of it is for.
And then also just riding a bike, how people just with Parkinson's could just get on the bike and then just take off. I mean, I didn't realize that either, which is kind of, it's just cool that your life doesn't have to stop. And his didn't. I mean, he was making bread and he was riding his bike. I mean, a representation of don't let your disease take you down.
Yeah. And that's what he embodied. And that was just thematically speaking, when we filmed it, we knew we wanted to do something that was as positive as his message, because so much of what people get is, oh, you get diagnosed and your life is over. And that's what the doctors do. That was what my dad was basically told. Oh, you'll be in a wheelchair in 5 years. So we wanted a film that sort of reflected what's possible versus and how you can make it happen. So that was sort of our thematic core and guiding light, the North Star for how we wanted to film it and edit it together and what we wanted to show people.
So what was your crew and how many cameras did you take on this shoot?
Ooh, that was kind of a moving target. We had primarily, when we were around town, it was maybe 1 or 2 cameras, myself and Ricardo filming. During the ride, that was like a battle. We had
I bet
3 crews. We had 3 crews filming nonstop. We had over 2,000 hours of footage. It was a lot. So Panasonic was amazing. They gave us, I'm blanking on the types of cameras. They were the big, hefty shoulder-mounted cameras. And of course, the rain and the weather was terrible. And I think it kind of ruined at least one of the cameras. No. That's what you're seeing, the degraded quality sometimes, because when it wasn't pouring rain for the second day, it was like this soaking Irish mist that the cameras didn't like, even with rain gear. So we had 3 cameras. One was always locked with Larry. So whether that was myself or Ricardo, one of us would always be next to Larry, no matter what happened. So we had like a production van tied to Larry. A lot of the times we were filming out of a donated minivan, either jury-rigged in the back or out of the sides. We had 1 floater for anybody with the ride. So like maybe in the crew, with bike races. So in the RV. And then we had our 3rd camera operator, which is a friend of mine, Danny Mendoza from NYU. He's a great filmmaker. And then he would maybe like jump ahead to the landing location, start getting those interviews, all of that. And then as we got to the finish line, we had a local South Dakota crew that also helped us get some B-roll in the winter because we couldn't fly out all the time. And then they showed up with a kit of 5Ds, and they would run around getting some B-roll for us too. So it was quite the battle plan.
And then how long did it take you to make it from start to finish?
I want to say 3 to 4 years. I think it's probably more accurate to say 4 years. And then 5 years when it started getting out into festivals and publicly screened.
And then you also talked about that you did some fundraising for the film. How did you go about the fundraising? What did you use?
We did Kickstarter at the time. And again, this is kind of going back in history. It was actually the early days of Kickstarter. So when people didn't know what crowdsourcing really was. And at the time, we became the most funded documentary they had in the history of the platform. Of course, it's been far surpassed. But at the time when people were saying, can I just write a check? And we were like, no, you got to use this platform called Kickstarter. That was not easy. That was a 24/7 job for like 2 very, very stressful months with, I don't know if Kickstarter's changed, but with that, like, if you don't hit your goal, then everything gets refunded. So yeah, so that was intense. And we only in the last week of our campaign went over the finish line and then actually like skyrocketed past it.
And then what was your goal to get? And then you said you surpassed it. What did you end up bringing in for the film?
Yeah, and I should say we also use the IDA, which is, I love that institution, the International Documentary Association. So they were also our fiscal sponsor. And then I think we did one other platform. I don't even know if it's around anymore. But our Kickstarter goal was 50,000. And then we got 65,000 when it finished. And then with the other donations that we received, we had over $100,000. And that was our budget.
Oh, that's great.
We had to do another round of fundraising for some post to finish it. Which we hit, thankfully, that post goal too.
Besides probably funding, like what were some of the challenges that you found when you were shooting? Weather, you had mentioned. Anything else that became a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think logistically, weather, we knew what the story was going to be, but I think also kind of being flexible in the moment to follow certain leads. You know, Larry really did injure himself. We didn't know till after the ride pretty badly. So there was a lot of kind of like jumping around to suddenly we're going to doctor's visits. And it was a bit challenging because they didn't know the process of filming. So like something would happen and be like, how did you not tell us? We should have had cameras there. So we always had to be at the ready to actually be there to capture it. The race itself was very like grueling and physically challenging and always trying to be there at the moments and there was a lot of stuff that didn't make it on camera. We filmed, they had a test run at another race, a big like South Dakota ride. It was like thousands of cyclists and Larry got lost and had a very bad fall. And so like there was a lot of moments, and maybe this isn't so much a production challenge, but just a filmmaker challenge because of Larry's physical limitations and the sort of moments that would happen that you're capturing that challenge you just as a person. You set the camera down and you just go to help versus being a filmmaker. I mean, because how could you not? So there's a lot of moments that we didn't wind up capturing that would have been important to capture because it was racing to help and making sure he was okay.
Right.
There was a lot of that. Personally speaking, it's just kind of hard for a lot of moments. Yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, I know there's just like a lot of the day-to-day challenges of how do we film these types of situations in the pouring rain. And of course, editing it was quite the beast too.
Yeah, because that's where you have to put it all together and make it make sense, which is sometimes challenging.
Yeah, I mean, we knew how we wanted to attack it, but it was just that constantly making the hard choices of killing your darlings and like getting rid of different sequences that I thought were powerful. But we always knew that the spine would be the race that we would use. It was like kind of a perfect structure, those 5 days on the road, and then branching out from there. And it was just a giant board. I mean, it was not really a physical board, but of all the things that I knew personally living with Parkinson's that I felt were important to show, like what is it like to be a caregiver and when your spouse turns into a caregiver, and then the different ancillary issues like genetic testing, how you get Parkinson's, or the benefits of cycling and visiting the Cleveland Clinic to show what that science is, medical marijuana. So like it was just like making little miniature documentaries and then assembling and attaching it thematically to the ride where it dramatically was a good transition to go to that moment. Oh, and I didn't even mention all the GoPros that we had We had like 6 GoPros on different bikes, which was good once when Larry did get lost in that crew. And the film crew, it was the one moment the film crew wasn't attached to him. So there was a production challenge. Everyone's like, where's Larry? And then it was the moment of like, really? We didn't film it? We didn't have the one time the camera van had stopped, I think, to like get gas or something. Like he veered off somewhere and it was missing for several hours. And we're like, that would have been a great story to film. It's we were there.
Right.
But we had the GoPro footage of it.
It's funny that you mentioned the GoPros because I was going to say, oh, it's too bad you didn't have GoPros. I don't know when GoPros came out, and I know the film was shot in 2011, but I was just thinking, then you brought that up. So that's great. I was like, yeah, GoPros are perfect for this kind of shooting, I would think. Attitude.
Oh yeah, they were great. It was the first GoPros. So they were the original ones that you couldn't even see the screen, and they had like it was like this giant manual to try to understand what all their symbols meant. And you're like, oh, I hope I did this right. So,
right.
And then you wouldn't know till you plugged it in and offloaded the cards. So,
yeah.
But they were literally running all day, 12 hours a day. And then we would just grab them, swap out the battery, or swap one GoPro that was fully charged with a dead one and just keep going. So, and we would have like, I think it was 3 or 4 with those 3 or 4 backups to constantly swap them out.
Yeah, it is. And then, and I just remembered what I was going to ask or comment on is Betty. I have to say that when I was watching it, I was thinking of the caregiver. It's like, and I was just thinking, we focus a lot on the person that's, dealing with the disease, though the caregiver is 7/24 taking care of somebody and can't really have their own life. I mean, their life is really to focus on the person that's dealing with the disease or sickness or whatever they have, So I love that you showed her. She was just just so positive, and you could just feel the love between them. I just thought that was so great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We always were kind of astounded that we couldn't have had better subjects and advocates just because of also their sincerity and their eloquence. And Betty also was, you couldn't think of a better person to be able to speak to the issues, of course, which are universal issues, but just as a professor, as someone who is just able to articulate the complexities and then also have just the emotional sincerity behind what she's talking about. And all that was real. And I know from my mom and what she dealt with, first she was taking care of my grandmother with Alzheimer's and then my dad with Parkinson's, and what that is like. And it's such a topic that's kind of overlooked because you just focus on the person who's diagnosed, but it's really the whole family has the diagnosis, and
yes.
Everything that has to change. So that was so crucial to show that, and what it means to be in love, or how does love change in the face of a disease, and what do you do when your role as a spouse has to become a caregiver, because that's so challenging.
Yeah, and I love that she rode bikes too. That was kind of cool too. Like she was like, yeah, I kind of wish I could get on the bike today. I was like, wow, that is just so great that, he rides, she rides. It's one thing because sometimes they ride, you don't ride, you just support. But, she was in it with him. So I thought that was just such a cool partnership that you captured.
Yeah, and I don't know if they were both like avid cyclists before, actually. I feel like obviously that came up, but yeah, together they did everything together. And it wasn't just for show for the documentary. I've seen documentaries where they sort of stage those things, but that was literally like we would show up and they were going to be going for a bike ride that day. So we would go out and follow them into the countryside and they would ride to the Missouri River. And I have to say the scenery there is gorgeous. Like when you think of South Dakota, maybe you think of Mount Rushmore, but that little corner, that southeast corner, it was, the weather is another story.
Right.
It's either -20 or it's like 100 degrees and there's tornado sirens and mosquitoes. And there's not much variable in between. So, but it was like astoundingly beautiful. I was very jealous. I was like wishing I could be on a bike with them instead of just filming it and stressed out. But
Right. Yeah. No, it was a very pretty place. Very pretty place. Is there any projects you want to share about in our closing?
I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously we just keep working project-wise, growing our company with Symptom Media. Hopefully I'll have some things to share in terms of my my company, or with my personal screenwriting, I should say, that I'm always working on. I do have a fun announcement that I sold my first novel, so that's going to be coming out next spring.
Oh, congratulations. What's the name?
Thank you. It's Hell or High Winter. So it'll be coming out from Rare Bird Publishing Company, hopefully spring of 2024. I have to start working with the editor and getting that all ready. So,
oh, that's great. What's it about?
It's kind of, my shorthand way of talking about it is it's Percy Jackson for adults. So kind of deals with Greek mythology and this conspiracy where one of the Greek gods living in present day, and of course not being worshipped anymore, suddenly has to go and rescue his sister. So it's kind of, it blends Greek mythology and present day.
Oh, that's great. Well, I can't wait. Send us a link and I'll put it in the bio or in the description.
Thank you.
When it comes out.
I would love that.
And I can always add it later.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any last words you want to leave our listeners with?
I mean, no, I thank you for, having me on and all your wonderful questions and being interested. And yeah, I hope if people are interested, especially if they know anyone with Parkinson's, that's always something I want to leave people with, that like, I really do hope they'll share the film, because we really tried to put a lot in there that's to educate families and give them some inspiration and positivity. And then likewise, if anyone is interested in anything to do with mental health and mental health education, our company is Symptom Media, so they can visit us online at symptommedia.com.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a delight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram at Tammy Magaro. Until we meet again, what's your story?